Liverpool-based Psygnosis was one notable publisher who already had several hits under their belt: Barbarian, Obliterator, and the seminal Shadow of the Beast. These games at the time were exclusive to these 16-bit home computers, and Psygnosis would make sure that you knew all about these games with full-page adverts in magazines showing off incredible visuals, the likes that had never been seen before outside of what you could play in the arcades. In the early days, Psygnosis was a development studio, but would soon transition into publishing. To do this, they would bring in smaller studios and individual coders to make their games, and they would pair them up with in-house design and art teams for the finishing touches. These games were showcases of technical and artistic brilliance, right down to the packaging and box. Unfortunately, in those early days, Psygnosis had a bit of a reputation. Gorgeous looking games that would often come riddled with hard-as-nails gameplay, unfair at times perhaps. Psygnosis would be the first to tell you that they prioritized graphics over gameplay, because at the time, that's what sold computers. One such team that Psygnosis brought on was Dundee-based DMA Design that signed a 6-game deal with Psygnosis to publish their games. Founded by a group of friends from a local computer club, Russell Kay, Mark Daly, David Jones and Steve Hammond, their first game released in 1988 was known as Menace after 18 months of development. Menace is a nice little horizontal side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that has power-ups, parallax graphics, but it's a bit of a rip-off of R-Type Salamander and Gradius. Menace was a good start, but DMA Design's next game was the 1989 sequel to Menace known as Blood Money. Menace and Blood Money sold well, but DMA Design would begin work on the sequel to Blood Money for a game known as Walker. Scott Johnson, who worked as a freelance artist at DMA, would design small character sprites 16 by 16 pixels in size, but it would be co-founder Mike Daly who suggested to reduce the pixel size to 8 by 8. According to Daly, one lunchtime I borrowed someone's Amiga and set about trying to prove him wrong, and this would be the resulting sprite animation sheet that was developed. These small sprites, like most graphics back in the day, were developed on the Amiga using Deluxe Paint, or D-Paint. It's a bitmap graphics editor created by Dan Silver for Electronic Arts and became a standard for creating pixel graphics in video games in the 90s. Mike Daly's animated sprite sheet wasn't really much of anything, just a demonstration of what could be achieved with 8 by 8 pixel characters and animation. But the team knew that they had something. DMA's Russell Kay would tell Mike Daly, "There's a game in that." DMA would come up with a puzzle game concept around these 8 by 8 pixel characters. Psygnosis initially rejected the pitch, preferring action-oriented titles, but it wouldn't take much convincing. While the concept was unproven and not what we would consider a normal Psygnosis title, Ian Hetherington, the co-founder of Psygnosis, would not be one to stifle the creativity of any of their teams, and this team would work around the concept of building a game based on these small animated characters, and a demo was built and sent to Psygnosis in 1989 for their input and approval. Psygnosis would greenlight the project and provide valuable feedback, strengthening the final product. This demonstration was quite technically impressive. It featured 100 animated characters on a 8 MHz PC with no slowdown. This concept would ultimately become 1991's Lemmings. Lemmings is a puzzle strategy game where you simply must guide a large number of small characters to the designated exit of each level with a minimum number of lemmings left alive and before the timer runs out. Left to their own devices, each lemming will just walk until it hits a barrier or falls off a ledge to its demise. Getting to the exit is done by using the mouse and selecting one of 8 different skills which range from climbing, floating, bombing, blocking, building, bashing, mining, and digging. Each with limited quantities. Levels include a variety of obstacles that prevent lemmings from reaching the exit, such as large drops, booby traps, and pools of lava. In some levels, some skills aren't available, so you must use your wits to figure out the best way to rescue as many as possible. In others, lemmings will fall from multiple entry points, so time management, pixel perfection, and skill is needed to beat some of the more difficult levels. Like all the best games, it's simple to pick up and play, but brutally difficult to master. With 120 levels in the game, it has all the gameplay in the world. It's addictive that feels way before its time, especially considering the success of mobile games that came later, such as Angry Birds, and more casual gamers would get a chance to play something on their home computers. Lemmings is a masterpiece. It's addictive today to pick up and play as it was in 1991, and it would go on to sell 55,000 copies on its first day. In comparison, Blood Money sold 40,000 units in total. Lemmings would see over 20 different ports to different systems, and was estimated to have sold at least 15 million units and as much as 20 million on the high end. Its success thrust the UK-based publisher onto the world stage, and it made Psygnosis a household name, and the publisher would famously be acquired by Sony in 1993. On face value, technically Lemmings doesn't look like much, but dig, no pun intended, a little deeper, and it's obvious that the game was masterfully programmed. First of all, it was programmed entirely on an Amiga 500 with no hard drive or internet connection. All files were saved onto floppies. The Amiga and the Atari ST both share the same Motorola 68000 and both run approximately at 8 MHz. Animating up to 100 characters on screen at any given time would certainly be challenging. The demo scene would often show off sequences of many animated objects on screen at once, and this was kind of a way to show off your coding skills. In Lemmings, DMA Design optimized the game engine using efficient sprite management and prioritization of essential animations. Mike Daly's 8-pixel Lemmings design minimized resource use while maintaining clarity, and Russell Kay's programming ensured the game ran smoothly even under heavy load. Backgrounds in the game were all designed using deluxe paint brushes and can be up to 1600 by 160 pixels in size. Given the standard Amiga screen mode for most games is 320 pixels wide, we're talking about 5 Amiga screens in width. The game runs with just 4 bit planes or 16 colors. 4 of those were used for the animated Lemmings characters themselves, with the familiar green and blue color values that really pop and never get lost in the background. The game runs beautifully at all times. The only real slowdown in the game is when Lemmings are blown up. This does tend to chug the 68,000 CPU, with many flying particles on screen at any given time. Aside from this, the game doesn't miss a beat. As mentioned, Lemmings has over 100 levels in the game, with varying difficulty. The early levels are there to get you familiar with each of the different skills that you'll need to learn, and are quite generous in terms of the amount of time that you have to complete a level. After every 20 levels, the game will get progressively harder, and thanks to a password system, you could easily continue from where you left off. Designing these levels would take lots of time and playtesting. And for this, DMA Design created a custom level editor during development, enabling for rapid creation, testing, and iteration of the game's levels. With a press of the escape key, the game can be put into editor mode, where the design of the level could be modified in real time and tested quickly. This allowed designers to craft levels with precise control over terrain, traps, and lemming spawn points. Music in the game was composed by Tim Wright, who you may know as Cold Storage. Before Wipeout, Tim worked on many Amiga titles, and Lemmings was no exception, with his take on classic songs. These tunes are so catchy, and thanks to the Amiga's Paula sound chip, they sound timeless. The game would also feature special levels that were nods to other Psygnosis games. Levels from games included Menace, Awesome, and Shadow of the Beast. All were big hits for Psygnosis, and this was a nice touch. It was often commonplace to see the famous owl logo appearing in other games, and Psygnosis were ahead of the curve. The original versions of Lemmings, both on the Atari ST and Amiga, included a lesser-known 2-player mode, which is an interesting feature for the time. During the late 80s and the early 90s, games like Populous, Stunt Car Racer, Battle Chess, and racing titles such as Lotus 2 all supported multiplayer through null modem cable, connecting 2 computers via serial ports. Before widespread internet access, modems would typically link computers to bulletin boards using specific command language. However, with a null modem cable, it allowed direct same-room multiplayer gaming by simply connecting two computer serial ports and even enabling cross-platform play between the Amiga and the Atari ST. Initially, Lemmings was to be designed to support this null modem multiplayer setup, but the idea was scrapped in favor of two-player split-screen mode. Both the Amiga and the Atari ST were built as gaming machines, and both had two joystick ports, with the mouse typically occupying port 1 and the joystick in port 2. Both the Amiga and ST could support two mice simultaneously, and Lemmings capitalized on this for its two-player mode. This design choice made multiplayer more accessible. Players could simply bring a second mouse to a friend's house rather than lugging an entire computer and CRT monitor, and this clever use of hardware showcased Lemmings' ingenuity in creating a seamless multiplayer experience. In comparison, the PC version of Lemmings did not support two-player multiplayer. This is because a PC could not have control of more than one mouse at any given time, and according to Mike Daly, the feature was dropped. And then came the ports, and there were many of them. Some of them were better than others, but what is true is that each system had its own challenges in rendering many small pixels on screen at good speeds. For example, the Atari ST version is an almost one-to-one replica of the Amiga original. Even the graphics are almost the same thanks to the 16-color palette of the original, but the sound obviously is much worse. The IBM PC version is good, it runs fast and supports CGA, EGA and VGA graphics, but the sound is not even close to the Amiga original, and gone is the two-player mode. The Acorn Archimedes version is considered one of the best ports after the original, but once again, there's no two-player split screen. On the other hand, the Apple IIgs port looks very nice, but runs at unplayable frame rates. It's amazing that this game was ever released in this state. Even the 8-bit micros such as the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum and Amstrad would see ports. The C64 version is quite good all things considered, but because the C64 only supports 8 sprites on the same row, the Lemmings characters are actually background objects, and there's definitely some slowdown when there are many Lemmings on screen at once. The NES port from Ocean is a bit of a mixed bag. While it does run at good speeds, because of the limits of the number of sprites on any given line, the game will flicker as it's rapidly switching between the sprite limits of the hardware. And worse, having to resort to the gamepad to play just doesn't feel the same as analog input perfection of mouse control. The SNES version is quite good. It's a solid port. The intro animation and music in the game are great, but again the game does slow down when there are many Lemmings characters on screen, and unfortunately the game does not support the Super NES mouse accessory. On the handhelds, the Sega Game Gear version is very well done. But the Game Boy version runs quite slow. The Mega Drive and Master System ports are very good overall, no complaints here. But if I had to pick my very best console port, it's undoubtedly the Panasonic 3DO version. It's a great port with its own intro. It has great gameplay, good controls, and the gamepad has some clever shortcuts. Even better is that the music was completely remixed for the game, which is fantastic. For me, the 3DO version is superb. There are ultimately many other versions and we can't go through all of them here, but what you need to know, if you want the definitive Lemmings experience, the Amiga original is hands down the best. It came on 2 floppy disks, with the first disc alone containing the animated intro sequence. It runs on a stock Amiga with just 512 kilobytes of memory. Of course, there would be sequels, in the form of Lemmings 2 The Tribes in 1993 and All New World of Lemmings in 1994. There were of course other Lemmings titles, including Lemmings 3D and The Adventures of Lomax on the Sony PlayStation. But DMA's original 6-game obligation with Psygnosis had completed, and they had moved on. They would go through several acquisitions and transformations, ultimately being purchased by Take-Two Interactive. In 2001, DMA would release Grand Theft Auto 3, and DMA would be renamed to Rockstar North. It should be obvious by now, but just in case you missed it, DMA Design, who created Lemmings, is the same DMA Design who created GTA 3. As for the Lemmings franchise, there were more ports of Lemmings on Sony hardware, including the PS2 and the PSP, but after 2006, there was nothing. Sony sat on the franchise for years, and it's unlikely that we will ever see the green-haired creatures in a video game again. Psygnosis, which was called Studio Liverpool in the 2010s, was closed down by parent company Sony Computer Entertainment in 2012. Lemmings is one of those once-in-a-generational games that has aged like fine wine. It's had a significant impact on the video game industry, particularly the puzzle game genre. It popularized the idea of puzzle games with a unique blend of strategy, timing, and humor. But above all, it was just so damn fun to play. Bye for now.